anything, wouldn't you say that you've really got to master the basics? Focus on the basics first before you start taking on intermediate or advanced topics like coding in PowerFX. This live stream is going to be a little different. There's going to be some portions cut out later on, and I'm going to split this up into many parts, perhaps 2 to 6 minute clips, and I'm going to make it a part of my coding or mastering coding with PowerFX. The course that's starting April 7th. You'll find links below about that. And there should also be some links regarding the community. So if you have any questions or anything, you can always email us at support@superpowerlabs.co, not .com. So I will be keeping an eye on the chat today as we go along, but this is going to be a fairly structured live stream. So as I cover basic topic after basic topic, please let me know in the chat. Let me see here. Yeah, as you can imagine, guys, I don't know what it is, but it seems like I always have technical difficulty. So yeah, I did not start right at 2, but it was important that I get everything just right before I hit the stream button. So thanks for your patience, and we will be going through the basics today. And that's just about all we'll be covering today. But guys, there's actually a lot of basics. So my aim in all this is that if you're an absolute beginner, or maybe you've created your first app, you still consider yourself to be a beginner, I would say this would still be of use for intermediate Power Apps creators to make sure they have all the basics under their belt. So I hope you guys enjoy this. And please excuse me if I start to look robotic, because again, this is going to be a part of the PowerFX course as a prerequisite, as if you can imagine that. Okay. All right. Yeah, I see you guys on there. And now I am going to begin. Please let me know if you hear any echo, if it seems like I'm muted or anything like that. This is really important that everything works well for you guys, okay? The first thing to go over with Canvas Power Apps is you need to log in to Power Apps Studio. Now, if I were to take this screen and go out of full screen mode, what you'll notice here is the URL that you need to go to is make.powerapps.com. Now, if you don't already work for an organization that uses Power Apps, or they haven't given you access to it, I would strongly encourage you to create your own tenant. And you might be thinking, whoa, I don't have hundreds or thousands of dollars to actually set that up. It costs $6 a month. And especially if you're in a government type of environment, you're not going to get all of the latest features with Power Apps. So keep that in mind. Also, your IT department or those that are in charge of setting things up within the PowerApps environment, they may not know exactly how to set up an environment for you. And you probably see up here in the upper right corner, default. It might have your company name and default in there. You do not want to use that if you can get IT to create at least a developer environment for you. Now, a developer environment, it's going to give you full control over that environment. Unfortunately, if you ask for that and they give it to you, no one else can use that environment. Nobody else can see your apps because you are the only one allowed in that environment. And for that reason, I would ask for a sandbox. It's going to give you most flexibility. It can be turned into a production environment. So if you are logged into Power, simply go up here, click on that, and then you're going to see a drop-down list here, and you'll see what you have access to. First and foremost, the apps item on the navigational bar within PowerApps is my favorite place to go first thing. I'm going to surprise you if you've never heard this before. You have no business. You have no business creating an app within these first few items. And I'll explain that. If I go over to home, you've got all kinds of help in here. You could type in something that is going to allow you to create a Power Apps very quickly. And it's very cool. Now, I don't use that to create any of my apps. I'm relying upon good programming practices and good software architecture to create everything manually. Now you could go over to the create. You've got all kinds of stuff that you can do here. And the reason why I say you have no business creating anything from these first few items here is that whenever you start off a PowerApps project, you really should be going over here to solutions. And you should create a brand new solution. Now, keep in mind that last time I checked, every single environment that I create, I set it up with Dataverse. Now, if you're not running Dataverse, you may have noticed this with the default environment. Perhaps it's up to the individuals, perhaps in IT, that have set things up, and they may or may not have set up Dataverse. And what I noticed with the default environment, things are fairly open. In fact, they're so open that Microsoft sets things up in a way so that people could go in there and play, get used to Power Apps and pulling in data sources and have all kinds of fun. And it is I believe it's for that reason, and I know in fact that Microsoft recommends as a best practice for these administrators over in IT that they rename the default environment. I don't want my browser window to come up here, so I'll just give it a second. And I'm going to click on this. Okay. And what you'll see down here, default, don't use. Now, what Microsoft recommends is that you call the default environment personal productivity. So no one gets the idea that they're going to start writing apps for the whole organization, because it's not really a good place to do that. So having said that, hopefully you do have the ability to come in here and click on a new solution. So that's exactly what I'm going to do here with you guys. So if you'd like to follow along, click over on solutions and go up here. And I'm going to say something like Power Apps Basics. Now notice the display name. Look at all these red stars here. These things are required, which is typically what a red asterisk means on a field. But for the name, I'm going to assume that you cannot have any spaces, okay? So you start typing here, it's going to put it here. And then it's going to take out the spaces. Now, let's see what we have to choose from for a publisher. Okay. Now, these things are typically created by default. Now, I created one for my company name, Super Power Labs, and that's the one I like to create a solution with by default. Now, if you don't have one that is simple and clear, I would recommend that you create a publisher. And so if we click on that, this is the type of information you're going to have to put in here. And let's say my company name is PowerApps Tutorial. That's the name of my YouTube channel here. And if I go over down here to name, I might be tempted to say PowerApps Tutorial. Is it going to allow? Okay, so it's going to allow spaces in both of those. You can put it in a description, maybe put your website URL. But this prefix is fairly important. So you want it to be short and concise. So for example, PowerApps Tutorial, I'm going to say PAT. And something you might be tempted to do is uppercase. Okay, I got my caps lock on. It's not going to allow that. So I could create a publisher with the prefix PAT. And what you'll notice is if you create things with a particular prefix, you use a particular publisher, hopefully you create, or the guys over in IT have created for you, or for everyone to use for the organization. You definitely want to have a short prefix and not something weird that Microsoft creates automatically for you for a given environment. Now, if I go over to contact, you can put in all kinds of information. Now, for Super Power Labs, I think I've got the website URL, support email, a phone number. Okay. Now, I'm just going to go ahead and save this. And it does not like the spaces in the name. Now, I think that's what that is. And it went ahead and created it. Okay. I'm going to use Super Power Labs. And what I'm going to do at this point is just click on create. Just keep it simple. And what we're going to see here is our solution. Okay. A solution can be made up of 1 or 100 Canvas Power Apps. It could have tons of Power Automate flows, Power BI reports, AI agents. You can see all kinds of things. There are cards, a Power Platform card. There's all kinds of stuff you can include. Something else you can include are Dataverse database tables. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to go over to apps, And if you, let's say for example, you'd already created your first Canvas app, and well, you can still add it here. That's no problem. But let's create everything new and fresh. So I'm going to go into app, and you have a choice between the three flavors of Power Apps. Now, a page, this used to be called Power Apps Portals, and they have rebranded that as Power Pages. So you've got something from Power Apps Portals or Power Pages. Then you got the model driven applications. I'm not really fond of model driven applications. That is the no code section of Power Apps. And if you want the low code, it's going to be Canvas apps. That's mostly what I cover here on this channel. From time to time, I might cover a little bit of the model-driven applications. I did cover that in not only my 5-day boot camp, but also the PL900 certification exam, which is the first exam that you would want to take if you want to become certified on the Power platform. But let's go ahead and click on Canvas app. And here we go. This is the typical first screen that you see. I'm going to recommend that you always click on tablet, because if you want it to be responsive for either a tablet, chances are you still might want it to be landscape oriented. And there are settings that you can set up so that it's completely responsive. It's going to shrink down to the right size if it's being used on a phone. So let's learn Power Apps Basics. That will be the name of my Canvas app application. I'm going to click on Create. Okay. Now I want to make sure that I am addressing anything that might be popping up in your mind as I go along. I'm going to exit the full screen mode, and I want to do a search here on M365 pricing. And look at this. It's the very first result there on Bing. Let's see what comes up here. You might be asking yourself, hey, I really do want my own tenant. Is it really $6? Yes. Now, that is paid yearly. Now, if you go with a monthly, I think it might be somewhere around $7 a month. So if you don't know if you want to keep it, maybe you just want to play around with it for 4 months. Sorry, not 4 months, but 1 month. You get 1 month for free, by the way. So $6 or the $7 isn't bad for trying things out. And I never wanted to sign up for a trial. I don't want anything that I build. I put some time in and invest my efforts into something, and then it's a trial and it goes away, anything like that. So that's what I went for. Now you might be tempted to click for home, and I would advise you against that. These these are for, and by the way, if you have any questions about the licensing, let me move myself here. And you always get this, need help, there's a chat, and we can ask whatever questions that we want here, or you could if you wanted to use that. I'm going to minimize that and move myself back over here. And this is going to give you stuff that would be good for home. And if you're wanting to learn the Power Platform, I'm trying to get rid of this thing here. There we go. I'm going to scroll back up. Here we go. Notice what it doesn't include. Did you know that 70% of people out there, now that is an approximate amount, okay? I did a poll with my viewers, found out that 70% of you guys are using SharePoint lists. Do you guys see SharePoint lists or SharePoint, the SharePoint icon? I don't see it. Let's go over to business now. And I'm going to scroll down and I'm going to try to see a comparison chart of what's included and what's not. Look at this. You get SharePoint. I believe you get 1 terabyte of cloud storage. Hey, that is not bad for $6 or $7 a month, might I say. Now, if you want to install Outlook, Word, Excel, PowerPoint, the applications locally, I would recommend maybe upgrading. And what I like to do is perhaps consider this, but I would probably consider something else. Okay. I'm going to, no thanks. I'm going to go up to products. Look at this. What about for the enterprise? Now, what's an enterprise? It's a large and happening organization in size. I find this very annoying. Trying to get rid of that. And if you're trying to decide, I wouldn't go for standard business. I would either go for the smallest one. You're going to get the most value for the buck, in my opinion. Of course, this is all my opinions. These aren't facts, okay? So if somebody gives you a different opinion, look into it and see what's right for you. Now, if we look at E5, what do we get here? Whoa. Okay. You know what's different about E5? I've always heard that you want to at least have one E5 account because there's all kinds of extra things that you can do. You get PowerApps Pro, Power BI Pro with that. Okay, I wouldn't go with any of these. Now, if I go to Office 365, now if you look here on the ones that do include PowerApps, if I go back over and I go back over for business, let's click on small business and see what we have. There is our business basic. Now, what does it include? You should be able to use PowerApps. This is where I start off. And I think what I did was I gave myself a PowerApps developer license. And there was a trial in there that I could just continue to renew. I don't think you're going to have a problem with this if you want to save some money. But yeah, if you're serious, I mean, look at some of these things that you get in here. So MailChimp, this allows you to do video editing. Okay. If you like that, if you don't have any other video editing tools at your disposal, that might be a perk. Microsoft Loop, if you ever use things like Notion, I believe their website is notion.so. It seems to be a competitor to that. And you get Microsoft Defender over here. But myself, I would either want to go with this Business Basic, maybe to start off, and don't go with the whole annual because you might end up wanting to go over to enterprise, and you may very well might want to use an E5. Um, all right, I'm going to click on for enterprise because it's giving me different things based on that. See plans and pricing for enterprise. There is the E5. Now notice what you get here. I believe what that is a premium license. Okay, so you won't be restricted on Power Apps. You get Power BI Pro. You get all kinds of stuff. Visio's included. It's fairly nice. And look at this. If you ever like to build your own computers, well, guess what? You get a license to Windows 11 Enterprise Edition. That's great. So if you have a business and you want to start using Power Apps or the Power Platform to service your clients, that's how I justify things like this. If you have money coming in through your business and this helps you in your business, I'd say go for it. E5. Now, it says no teams. So, guys, I'm not a licensing expert, but if you are really serious in making sure you get the right um, product for you, look at this. There's an 11-page PDF here that you just saw me click on. I need to get out of full screen mode there. So I hope that that helps you in deciding which license to go with so you can have your own playground. Now, that's actually something I provide for my Accelerator students. Um, Now, the Accelerator is my flagship offering, but I have all kinds of perks, such as you would get your own Power Platform environment, you get your own Dataverse database, you get all the SharePoint sites that you would like. And upon request, I will set up a SQL Server for you. So there's a lot of perks. I won't go into that. What I'm trying to do here now is just show you the basics. So I'm going to start closing these things up. And if you're interested in this link, I think what I'll do is I'll actually share that right now in the chat. And hopefully you can see that. Now there is one setting I need to check on to make sure that it is enabled. So if you wouldn't mind bearing with me for a moment while I look into that. Okay. Very good. So let's jump into the Power Apps basics. Are you guys excited? I am. I never get bored with the basics. And I've got a lot of I got a lot of depth to provide with all the different basic things here that you can do with Canvas apps. I do have a checklist that I am using, and I'll be systematically going through each of these topics I have prepared. Trying to find out where that is. Yep, it's not there. Let me see. Wow, I'm just having a rough time with technology today. And while this list is coming up for me, let's talk about the the Canvas PowerApps Studio. Now, what you're going to notice is there are several bars and panes that you'll find all around this interface. And for those of you who are signing up for the PowerFX coding course, if you're on the fence, now is the time to purchase and enroll because there is still an early bird special. You'll find if you go look, I don't like to mention the pricing in videos, especially if things change, and over time the price will go up. But right now it's really cheap if you consider a let's say a full week, let's say 40 hours. You're actually getting more than that. Probably the biggest question that I get about any course that I offer. I used to do a 5-day course where we've got 3 hours in the morning, 3 hours in the afternoon. You know, you got your lunch break, but for 5 days. Um, in this day and age, can anyone really get off for a full week? I found that a lot of people can't, and they're always asking like, "Hey, I'm signing up, but will will it be recorded and will I have access to the recordings?" And the answer is always absolutely. And what I'm doing with the course is I'm breaking it up in very small segments that can be covered during your lunchtime. Okay. And from 11 a.m. EST until noon, I'll be available for office hours to help you guys out with anything that we're covering in the PowerFX coding course. There'll be at least an hour presentation. It might go past that hour for maybe 15 minutes, but the time from 1 p.m. to 2 p.m. is just time for you to work on your practical labs assignments. And if you miss any of those or you didn't get it done, well, you actually have a good 22 hours to get those done. You can show up during the office hours that I'll be there to help you out, so that everybody can catch up every day. You know, maybe you're in a different part of the world. I actually had somebody email me from South Africa today, and they were asking like, "Hey, I won't be able to make any of the live sessions. What am I going to do?" And I simply explained, "Yeah, all the recordings are going to be there. You're going to be able to access those, and there's plenty of time to catch up each day." So it's going to be held on every business day from 11 to 2 p.m. EST. And there's going to be 30 sessions. It's going to be 6 weeks. So I just want people to understand that. I'm sure if you're watching this and you're getting a lot out of it, as long as you master these basics, I would say that you are going to be prepared for the PowerFX coding course. And I'm just dealing with some technology issues right now. That is what's taking me a while. Something also that we may be able to cover today, once we cover the basics, or to be honest, I will be covering this probably throughout, and that is best practices, recommended best practices. So there's all kinds of way to do things wrong, and there's much fewer ways of doing things right. So I want to give that insight as we go over the basics. And if there's anything that comes to mind that would be more appropriate for to cover at the end, I'll cover it there. What I'd really like to do is pay my computer each day not to give me a hard time. I would gladly pay that. Yeah. Okay. If I can get this list to come up, then I might find one of my other outlines. So, if you're wondering if the PowerFX coding course focuses on Canvas apps and if there'll be any material covered for model driven apps, model driven is the no code aspect of PowerApps. Now, you might find some places to put expressions or a little bit of code, but for the most part, it's considered no code. So it might be a weird thing to go over any type of PowerFX coding for model driven. So we're going to be focusing primarily on Canvas apps. And I have a whole outline of tons of topics. And there have been some students have expressed interest in perhaps being exposed to PCF components. Now, PCF stands for Power Apps. The C is for, I believe, component. Um, let me make sure that I get this right. And the F is for framework. So Power Apps component framework. And what you can do is create your own code components. Now, would you write that in PowerFX? No more than likely you'll be using a language called TypeScript. So I will be sprinkling in some TypeScript so in everything so that if you do want to go forward and create your own PCF components, then you're going to have a good primer for that. In fact, as I cover um, more on the end of the basic side of coding, um, I very well might give you examples of how you do the exact same thing in TypeScript. Now, TypeScript is, in my opinion, a cleaned up version of JavaScript. Of course, JavaScript is very ubiquitous. It's everywhere you look, and it's probably the language that I hate the most. It's just sort of sloppy, and there's no types. And so that's what TypeScript does. Microsoft created that as an open source project so that you can code in JavaScript, might I say, properly and with types. So, and that's the language that you build PCF components with. Now, if you want to create your own Power Platform connector, then in the research that I've already done, you'll need to do that in C Sharp. And might I say, C Sharp is syntactically much like TypeScript. You have curly braces to start and end, loops, and there's all kinds of things. And I want to connect those dots for you guys. And by the end of the PowerFX coding course, you will feel like a computer programmer. You will be exposed to many software development concepts. So if you're ever put in a department with fellow developers, you're going to feel right at home. You're not going to feel intimidated. And, um, if anybody challenges you on, you're not a real coder, you do that low code stuff. Um, so when you get done with the course, you should feel fairly confident in a lot of things. I will be teaching object-oriented concepts and designs. So I know we're covering basics today, but if you were to ever go over to this component tab, you'll notice that you can add your own components. And guess what? You're implementing a lot of object-oriented programming concepts there. And if you don't learn them, you will end up sort of confused why you can or can't do certain things. And even though PowerApps gives you the ability to violate a lot of object-oriented programming, I'll just call that OOP for now. Um, you might be wondering why things don't work right and you have problems that come up. You really need to embrace object-oriented programming. Okay. So I've got my list over here. I wanted to access it in a different way and it just isn't working right now, but I am able to see what I'm going to go over here. Fantastic. So the first thing I want to show you, first thing that you might see, a lot of times our minds work in the upper left corner, but it's probably this way at the top. So here you see this waffle. So hey, if you want to deal with Power Automate, you can easily access all these other things. But you'll notice that the name that you give your Canvas Power Apps application will be right here. Okay. And if you just see app, you are in danger. There's a meme called "I'm in danger." All these fires in the back. It's a cartoon. Um, because if you go into the settings within your project, now this is what I would call the menu bar. It's called many things. You can call it a ribbon. You could call it a toolbar. But if you go in here and go into settings, now notice this little sprocket icon. It's down here and it will bring up the same thing. There's also a sprocket up here in the upper right corner that does not do the same thing. Now, it might give you access to some cool stuff that you might want to check out. But let's stay out of that for now. And let's go into the settings for this particular application. So there's the name. Here's a description that you can give it. We could say my first app that puts to use the basics. Now you can pick a different icon. Now these are the built-in icons within Canvas Power Apps, but please keep in mind that you can actually add your own icon. And I'm gonna try to pick something here that would look nice and apropos or appropriate for an app like this. Hey, how about that? There is the Power Apps icon. And in this case, I would probably go for this purple color that's up here on this bar. That would look very much like Power Apps. So it would go with this icon. Now, I do have all the hexadecimal values that I use, or that's actually inside the branding for Power Apps. And I'm going to bring that up over here on my other screen. And this might end up being very helpful. Yeah. So the hexadecimal value for this, I'm just going to paste it in, and that is the color. Icon fill. Now we don't want to do anything with that. Oh, look at this, autosave. Now, this brings on the topic that if you just see the word app up here, quite possibly you have not saved your project initially. And I can't overstress this enough. Number one, you need to make sure this is on because it can save you in a lot of cases from losing tons of work. But if you never save it initially, it's never going to do that save every 2 minutes. It's sort of like having a Word document open and you never save it, so it doesn't know to auto save anywhere because you haven't provided a place on your hard drive or in the cloud where you want it to go. So keep that in mind. The phrase that I use is save early and then save often. Okay, so I'm going to click close here. I'm going to hit save. Now, if you want a shortcut for save, it's simply Control S. So whenever I move my cursor up here to this play button, I always make it a habit to actually save before I hit play. Now, why would I do that? If PowerApps is saving it every 2 minutes, well, that's a great question. Let's add something to our screen. Okay, there is a button. So I'm going to show you here in a few minutes what you can do with your project. PowerApps actually keeps track of all the changes. It has version history built into this. So let's say the beginning of the morning you log in and you're working on it all the way until lunchtime. And you never save it manually by hitting Control S or hitting the save button. Sometimes you'll be working, all of a sudden this thing will become disabled and you're not able to save it. So just letting you know about that. This is very foundational. It's very important, and that's why I'm spending so much time on this here. So if I just sit here and talk, a lot of 2 minutes go by. Okay. And so if you work on all day on it and you go off to lunch, and when you come back from lunch, you'll get a pop-up within PowerApp Studio that says, oh, you've been, I don't even think it says that you've been inactive. They'll just pretty much tell you like, oh, your session is about to expire. No, that means your session did expire. If you didn't see it pop up and you clicked on it in a timely manner, a lot of times it will just refresh it back to the last save. And you might think, oh yeah, those 2 minute saves, they work. But let's say from 8 a.m. when you started all the way up until 11 o'clock, noon, 1 p.m., whenever you choose to go to lunch, somewhere within that time span, you really mess things up. Whenever you do a manual save, now you see the save isn't enabled here, but it's going to tell you when it was last saved. So it says 3:10. So that was a minute ago for me. If you do a manual save, it creates a restore point. If you just rely on those 2 minutes, it does not create restore points. Have you ever played a video game and you're about to fight the boss? Or in this case, work on something really complicated, perhaps. You always want to save your game right before you do something that you probably either will mess up or die in the video game. So that's called a checkpoint, or you just manually create a save. So sometimes it will create those little checkpoints for you. Even though PowerApps does do the save every 2 minutes, it's not creating restore points for you. So you come in at 8 a.m., you saved early, you saved it right away. Let's say it was a brand new project. And I say save often. If you don't manually save often, you don't get those restore points. So let's say you messed it up big time and you're like, I'm sick of this. I'm going to go off to lunch, and you never do that manual save, then you can't restore something back from a certain point in time. Now, because nothing has changed here, it probably won't do any automatic saving. Okay. And I'm going to wait for this little save button to go disabled. And I'm going to talk to you about any pertinent things that come to mind. So something that I will circle back on a topic, which is perhaps you're still considering creating your own tenant. There are a lot of upsides to having your own tenant. I'd say the biggest thing that is a huge upside to doing so is that you can play around with things, you can turn options on. I mean, if you create an absolute mess with your tenant, you could turn off the auto renew for the license that you picked. We'll create a new one if you want later on or something. But um, you're on full control of your tenant. You can turn all kinds of things on, and you got no IT department to tell you no. And I love that. For a guy that's been working in IT for 25 plus years, is I've had IT tell me no. So I imagine they tell people in other departments no all the time. Now, I can imagine, did you see that? It just now saved for me. Okay, so we should feel good about exiting out of this app. Leave. And you notice that it's not going to give us a prompt to save. Okay, there is our project, Learn Power Apps. Now you notice I can just work directly from this solution. I can edit in a new tab, I can play it, find out what the users are going to see because they're not going to see anything unless you publish it. All right. Now, what I'm going to show you here, and you can see this from the other screens, wherever you see your application listed here, you could go down to details. Details has a lot of details you can check out. So you find out the owner, the description of the app, all this type of stuff, when it was last modified. So I've got 314, and that was a minute ago or so. You can provide this link to people as long as you've shared it with people or an intra or an AD group, and perhaps they don't know how to get to it. So you can get this link and send it off to them. And there's a mobile QR code. You could actually do a screen shot of that and put it into an email. They can scan it with their phone and use your app from their phone. But the one thing I want to direct your attention to is the versions tab. Well, look at this. This is where I initially saved. And then it has 314 in there. And that looks like it might have been the autosave. And maybe that's because we got out of it. So that's something to consider. So the autosave does work on the last save before you exit. So that's good. Now, how I work and what I want to do for you guys is I want to go about all these, showing you all these basics, and I'm going to be hitting Control S a lot. And what you'll see, every manual save, there'll be all kinds of different places. Let's say we want that first version back. I can hit restore, and it's not going to mess up these two other versions. It's going to create a new version, a version 3 on the top. And you could click on a different version, and the users will only see the version that has this live set up. Okay. I'm going to click on this side here to get rid of that bar. And I'm going to edit this thing in a new tab. All right. So you see we do have our two buttons. If I go back into settings here, okay, it retained all of this information. That's good. I'm going to click close. Now, you're probably a little familiar here with the menu bar because I keep showing you how to go in there. Now, if you click on things, you might find things here change. Okay. Look, this is the body background or the background color of the screen. Now, if I click off of it, I was thinking it might, uh, that actually would go away, but thankfully it stayed there. And if you look at these things here, I almost wish settings was always there, but they've put it down here for us. Okay. So if you ever hear me say menu bar or ribbon or command bar, chances are I'm talking about this, unless we're talking about your app. So what you can do, you're going to become very familiar with this input drop-down menu. And what you can do here is you can type in, there's all kinds of controls that we're going to go over here in a little bit. If you type in toolbar, oh, it's in preview. It's a new thing. Look at that. And a toolbar can be put at the very top of your application. So it's a little bit of a menu. Something that you should know about Canvas PowerApps as of now, there is no menu control. Now, I do teach how to create your own menu control. And in other videos, you can actually find quite a bit of material on my YouTube channel where I step you through all of that. But so a toolbar is usually common things that you want to do within the application. So you might have a toolbar for your application for people to add, edit records, delete records, get information on that record. I would say what most people like to have in any of their applications is a header. And for years, if you see a preview, chances are those are controls that we just haven't had for most of the time, and they just released it recently. So we could end up start to make something that looks fairly nice here. Okay. Now listen, there are only 3 things that you need to learn to master PowerApps, not just the basics. And I'm going to tell you what those things are now. Canvas PowerApps can be broken down into 3 categories. Now, right here, right now, we are talking about the UI, and that is one of the categories that I would put that in, Canvas PowerApps in, is I'm going to include what you see here. This is Canvas PowerApps Studio. Now, we've already started adding controls to a screen. So if you hear the word control and you're like, what is a control? That's something I've never heard before. If you are a developer, you're probably very familiar with that. Control is something, some type of a visual component that you can add to the user's interface that allows them to control or drive the application. If you can imagine somebody getting into the car for the first time, or any time really, you have got controls all over the place in the dashboard. Now, if we didn't have a UI to a car, could you imagine turning on the AC or the heater by pulling on one of the vacuum hoses that are underneath the hood of the car? But you know what? If you didn't have a dashboard, you could just lean forward and pull one of them, or take it up and put it in another vacuum tube input or export. What would you do without a steering wheel? You know, so the user doesn't need to know about the database. They don't need to know about database tables. They don't need to know about all the code that you wrote. The only thing they're concerned about is the UI, the user interface. Now, back in my day when I got into programming, back in 1998, that was commonly referred to as GUI, a graphical user interface. And then people would just say GUI. But these days you don't hear that. You don't hear GUI or GUI. It's all UI and UX. Well, hold up a minute. What's UX? It is related to the UI, but the term or the words that the UX stands for. It's UI, the user interface, and then the user experience. The X comes from the second letter in the word experience. And you could have a beautiful interface that just looks great. It's a beautiful UI. But maybe the user experience is absolutely horrible. Have you guys ever heard of WOP? WHOP.com. I do have some of my communities over there. And for those of you who created an account over there, you'll know their website looks great, but they're constantly changing things. It's hard to know where to go. I I heard from many people, I'm lost. I don't know how to get to anything. And I'd have to say I'm included in that. I have their UX is horrible, and I will be moving away from that platform, even though it's free. For me to host things there, it's just not worth it. I'm here to serve you guys, and the tools that I pick have little to nothing to do with if it makes it easier for me. It's for you guys. If you guys don't have a good user experience in a tool that I pick, then I need to move away from it and go to one that works best for you guys. Okay. So you guys are familiar with what a menu bar is, what a ribbon is. They started the term ribbon with Microsoft Word. So you guys might be familiar with that term just coming from Office. Toolbar, as you see, this is a toolbar. And we've gone over a little bit of what's here. So the insert pull down menu here, you're going to be using this quite a bit. Okay, so if you expand all these things, look at all of these controls that we could add. Now, if you ever see a diamond here, that means that you're going to need, and your users are going to need, a premium license to access it. So you put that on there, man, they better have a premium license. So you can see all the different types of things that you can add in here. So if you're adept at using Power BI, well, guess what? You can add your Power BI reports, the tiles, into your apps. So that's great. So there's a lot of stuff you can go through. Once they started putting everything into categories, I don't even try to find things anymore. I just type. I do the same thing for Windows start menus. It's like I just don't have the time for that. So I'm just going to type in what I want. So if I want an image control, I can add it. Like, oh, what image do I want to put in there? I got to go find an image. No, you don't. You don't have to go off and find an image. You just go over here to image. Oh, look at this. The first item is stock images. Let's see what we can find here. You know what? I think this image might look really nice as a screen background. Now, you're going to have to adjust a few things. As you see over here on the right pane, this is called the property pane. And something else we can do with this is we could reorder this and send it to the back so all the other controls can be seen. Now you can also have a transparency. Maybe it's a little too much. Well, you need to give it a number between 0 and 1. Okay, so if you put in 0, it's completely opaque. It's completely, you can't see through it. Now, if I put trying to use a point there, okay, 0.5. That's 50% opacity or transparent. Let's move that up to maybe 9. Okay, maybe you want something really faint. But if you put in a 1, I usually work with the other way. So with colors within PowerApps, there's a function called RGBA, and for the A, it's a percentage of opaqueness, where with the image control, it is based on transparency. So if I put a 1 there, it's 100% transparent. And let's say I want it to be, so if I hit 0, it's going to be completely opaque. I can see the whole thing. But maybe what I want to do is I just want it slightly transparent. Now, if this was on top, look at that. I can see some stuff behind it. You know what I use this a lot for? Is for containers and rectangles to create a little pop-up window within Canvas apps. Okay, so in that case, I might have it take up the full screen. Let's introduce the rectangle control. Now, what I like to do, if I have a pop-up window, is I will pick a color of white. So I could simply type up here in the formula bar. This is where you're going to put all your code, by the way, the formula bar. I'm going to say color.white. Okay. And now I'm going to click over here for colors, and now I've got a color picker. I could go in and say, for my my pop-ups, I usually go with 85 or 90. And it got it all wrong here. Okay, you see it says 7.8. No, I'm going to go up here and change this to like 85, 95. Okay, and then I might have some buttons, and I might say, hey, are you sure you want to delete this record? Something like that. So, and you can combine things. So let's make this thing take up the full screen. Let's go, and you can see the rectangle is on top of that. And so, by the way, this thing off to the right, this is the tree view. Now, it's just not the tree view. It's got tabs that you can click on here to get at different things. Now, you remember this insert pull down menu? Well, you could simply click on this plus,
And you're going to see all those same controls that you can insert from there. Okay, so that's nice to know. Here you can pull in your data sources, and your data sources could range from a SharePoint list, a database table within Dataverse, a database table within SQL Server, PostgreSQL, MySQL, and all you have to do is click on Add Data and go look for the different connectors. Now, what they're trying to get you to do is to use Dataverse database tables, and that's not bad. Keep in mind, we've got the diamonds there. That's premium. But if you go down in here, I could go look up SharePoint. Ah, there we go. Looks great. And you could pull in your SharePoint list one by one. Now, while we are here on this left pane in the tree view, we might want to move some of these things around very quickly. You can't drag them. Oh, I guess they've added that. I love the days where I'm able to learn something new. So that's really awesome. Now, what I really wanted was if we added a second screen, and I'm just going to click on a blank screen. Can I drag that? Oh my goodness, guys, you don't realize how many years I've been waiting for that. Might I say 5 years up until this day. Wow, I'm super excited about that. So I'm going to move screen one up there. Okay, well, now that we have the ability to do that, let's move the header up there. Let's move our toolbar up there because we don't want those two things to be covered up. And perhaps on this toolbar, I'm sort of hoping that I could provide a white background for that. Now, I don't see a way right away. Now, I do have some color values here, but I think that's more for the things inside there. We could make this rectangle be a backdrop or a background for that but toolbar control. Okay, so that's nice. And we have an image for the background. Now we probably want to move these two buttons up and just use this image as a background. So, hey, look at this. We're not doing too bad. Maybe you want your save and cancel buttons here at the bottom. Okay. So I'm going through all this stuff and teaching you all about the environment here. Now, I do need to finish what I started talking about a few moments ago. All of Canvas Power Apps can be broken up roughly within 3 different categories. UI of Power Apps. So that includes using the Canvas Apps Studio, Canvas Power Apps Studio. It also includes knowing how to use all these controls that we can put on here. All the visual stuff that you put into your application would be under UI. Now, what else is included in UI? Well, if you ever go over here and create a new component, what is a new component? Well, it's definitely not a beginner level topic, but I will touch on it briefly. So we can have a width of 640. Let's say I only want it to be 120 pixels in height. I'm going to give it a color that might be a little annoying with our other colors, but now that we've done this, I could go over to the screen. You could go into Insert, and look at this. Our second item is Custom. So I'm going to click on Custom. And that's what we named our component, whatever the default was. So I'm going to click on that. So you could create your own component. Guess what? That is more UI. And hopefully you've seen this enough by now that I could reorder this and send it to the back so that these buttons have a little space of their own to reside. They don't look like they're too much out of the norm there. Okay, so Canvas, PowerApps Studio. All of the controls that you can use, bring over to your screens. Even screens themselves would be a part of the UI. And of course, you have the components, which I just showed you. Generally speaking, that's all of the UI that you need to learn about Canvas PowerApps. What's the second item? The second item would be data. Okay, so if you were to work with any type of data, now the first thing that might pop in your head is, oh, a database table, or oh yeah, a SharePoint list. It's got data in there. That's true, but there are actually some other areas included in this. So there are types of values that you can work with within Power Apps or almost any coding platform. Almost. So you might work with a data type of integer or a number. You know, that number could be a decimal, could be a whole number, which is an integer. You could have a date time type. You could have a Boolean type. What's Boolean? Maybe you've heard that before. It simply means a true or false value. And that value could be represented. That value could be represented by either a 0 or a 1. An on, off, with a single bit within memory. Okay. So if you ever set something to be true or false, that is a Boolean value. If I click on this button here, look at this. I could write code in an event called onSelect. So that means if I were to run this program and click on this, the code that you put in here would be executed whenever the user selects that. And you see, if I select the code here, or this expression, it is a Boolean type. And right now it has a value of false. Now keep in mind that Canvas PowerApps is a case-sensitive language. So if I go in here and type false, it's going to give me red squigglies. The dreaded red squigglies here. Has no idea what you're talking about. Make sure it's lowercase. Or we could go in here and say true. Okay. Again, notice that's lowercase. So that's how you work with a Boolean type. Now, there are programmers from other languages, and we could name off C, C++, and quite a few others, that a 0, a numeric value of 0, always means false if you're treating that value as a Boolean. You could implement that, okay? Inside of PowerApps, I don't recommend it though. Now, what about true? You might say true. Oh, yeah, that's 1. Well, you could actually return any other number, any other number except 0. And that could mean true. Okay. You could return a numeric value into something while you're working here. And you could be returning, you could be giving back to whatever is calling your code, and you could be returning an error code. You know what code you never will find in error codes? 0. Because 0 means false. It means no error occurred. So this place is on select. This is a weird property that's initialized either to a true or false value. Now that's not really all you can put in there. In fact, most people never just put a true or false value in there. But you could be returning an error code. So you've got all the numbers, any other number except 0 is a true, and then 0 could be treated as false. So keep in mind, not only are you learning the basics here, um, but you're also getting a little bit of the background of how things are done in other languages, so that if you want to stop being an app creator and be an application developer, you will know a lot of these terms that are used in the software industry world. Okay, let's proceed with the basics, shall we? So, of course, we've been working on a screen. It's named screen 1. We can go over here and we could call this home screen. Now, do you notice the space? Should I have done that? You know, if you look at controls here, it says button canvas 1 underscore 1. If I click on this other button, it says button canvas 1. Well, we really should be giving meaningful names to our buttons. Okay. Now, what you're going to notice here, and I didn't realize this for a long time, guys, and you're getting it all here up front. Double click into a button, and of course, it's going to make a liar out of me. Microsoft has really switched up things on us, and that's a good thing. We're making progress, and this tool that they've provided for us is ever evolving. So that's a positive thing. But if I type in button, look at the choices that I have here. I've got input button, and then I've got a classic button. Well, that's because for years we've had classic buttons. Now, do you notice any difference here between this button and these? They used to be called, you see it says button right there. Hopefully you guys see my cursor. It just says button. If I click on the classic button, it just says button. And if you want to learn more, it's going to tell you, hey, this is the classic button. If you double click on the text, you can change it. Okay. I'm a little disappointed to find out that you can't do that with the modern ones, but usually I don't really use it very much at all. I'm going to delete that classic button. And I do recommend that you use modern buttons because they've been out for uh maybe a year. I would say maybe close to 2 years or a year and a half. So they're here to stay. They are the way of the future. Are using controls within PowerApps? They are the future. So I would try to use the modern version of controls at this point. I reckon when they first came out, I'm like, you don't want to use those because they don't have all the properties that you need. And in fact, Some of them still don't have properties that I might come across. I'm trying to build an application and I'll need the classic version because it's got some functionality there that really sets it apart and I need it for a particular app. So if you go into the insert menu here, they actually have a section for classic controls. And with some of these controls, there is no modern version of it. And I'm looking here, and I think the ones that they're listing here, with the exception of the galleries, do have a modern equivalent. So let me make sure that I'm not lying to you guys. So here's a vertical gallery. Let's open up a vertical gallery. Okay. That looks just like the classic gallery we've always had. Now it's in desperate need of a background color. Let's go with a dark gray for the background. That doesn't look very good. Um, and they try to put things in here to help you out. You know, here's a next button or a select icon that allows you to put some code against this to go to a different screen to edit or view more details. I never recommend that you guys use those controls. What I would want to have, I'm going to type in blank. I recommend that you always use blank, even the beginners. Okay, so if I say blank vertical, first thing I might want to do is give it a background color so I know where it begins and ends. If you can imagine, I go over here to the second screen and I try to add in a gallery, I'll say blank vertical. Okay, it wants me to pick a database table. Okay, whatever. But then you're left with this. What's going on here? That looks strange, huh? Now the data source, unless you set it to something else, and it keeps on trying to get us to create a data source. You see this up here? Custom gallery sample. What is that? I'm going to show you something that maybe even intermediate PowerApps developers don't even know. If you click on it, it's going to tell you, oh, that's a table value. Remember I told you that there are types that we can work with? You can open this up. And okay, these are just some sample values. There's an image in there, there's a heading, and then there's a value, there's a column that will have more text. Okay. But we picked a blank one. So what I would do, I normally do pick a gray color, and then I go over to template fill. So you guys notice a reoccurring pattern here? And I'm doing this on purpose. So you're actually learning the basics because I keep doing the things over and over again. I can add a control. Have you noticed we have a bar at the very bottom of the screen? Oh, look at this. We're on screen two. Or we can go look at the one component we've created. And now that we're on screen two, you notice I can click on that gallery and it shows it right down there. I believe a lot of people don't even notice that. But if you follow me, if you learn from my videos, you're going to know that. Okay. We picked a nice gray color there. And it's not a pure gray. You know, we just picked one of these gray colors. If you go over to custom, if you want white, black, or shades of gray, and you want a true gray color or a true white or a true black. All of these three values for RGB need to be the same. Now, the higher the values you put in here, the more closer to white you're going to get. If you make them all zeros, it becomes black. So it's a little counterintuitive. I would think all zeros would be white or transparent. Well, that's what this little alpha, this A is for, if you want it to be transparent. And you would give it a value between 0 and 100. So you would think that you would start off with white, and as you go up, you'd go to black. But that's not the case. Now, you ever see hex codes? That is a different way of representing the RGBA. In fact, let's zoom in on this. And we're looking at the hex code. And those are not decimal values. What is a decimal value? A decimal numeric value is based in tens. And the RGBA is decimal. Now, you can only have 0 and then up to 255. Now, I'm going to get out of that. And I'm going to type in, let's say 240. Okay. Now the R stands for red. And look what happened. It put in an F. Okay. The first two characters is a red value. Now, if we said 255, the max value in hexadecimal format. Now, what does hex mean? Hex means 6. Decimal means a numeric system based on 10. So when you go from 0 to 9, 0 being included, you have 10 values. So decimal, have you ever heard of the Dewey Decimal System? Okay, it's all based in 10. Now, what if you have more than 10 values? So you go 0 through 9, and it's only going to use a single digit. And then when you go to 10, guess what? Now you've got 2 digits. And if you go up one more, now you're at 11. So you're reusing digits. And everything's going to be 0 through 9, 10. What does decimal mean? 10 or dec, decimal. Now, when we say hex or hexadecimal, hex means 6. Now, think about this. We're seeing letters here. A, B, C, D, E, and F. Oh, there's 6. But what they're doing is they're combining decimal and hex. So essentially what we have are 16 possible values. So if I say here 1, where does that get me? Well, I mean, it looks like black, but it's not pure black. Can you imagine having 100% completely pure distilled water, and you've got it in a jug, and you're down here in Florida where things get hot in the summer, and you're sweating, and you're like, I don't know, this is gonna sound weird, but you're at your neighborhood corner, selling buckets of pure water. And you got a sign out there that says pure distilled water. And you put them inside brand new plastic buckets. Okay, they have no contaminants at all in them. And you lean over and one drop of sweat goes into that water. Is it still pure distilled water? No, not anymore. So it's like it's either you're pregnant or you're not. There's not almost pregnant. So, looking at a black, oh, that's black. Do you know that for sure? Is it absolute black? So I'm going to go back over to custom here. Now we make this to be, we could say 255, and you see it, the maximum value in a hexadecimal are two Fs. Okay, so if we say 10, what just happened there? If I typed a 1, that would be, if I typed in 0, let's actually do this without this thing disappearing all the time for me. Let me type in here a 0, okay? In hexadecimal, you'll typically see one or two zeros. If you only see one zero, it's the same thing as a double zero, okay? Just like 0, 1 is really the same numeric value as just a single digit 1, right? Okay, so you start off with 0, and then I say 1. Okay, well, there's 1. What about 2? Okay, it's just a 2. What just happened? I'm going to do a manual save. I think it might have just, I actually don't know what it did, but there's a 2. If I type 3, okay, we got a 3. The first two digits are for the red. 4, 5. All the way up until we get to 9. What happens when we say 10? Oh, we don't go to 11. We go beyond decimal. The one thing after that will be A. What about 11? B. You got C, D. What's F here? Of course, 16. Nope, that's not it. 15, because it's zero based. Okay, so what I'm doing is I'm giving you, I can't believe that I had that covered up there. So including 0, going all the way up to 15, those are 16 values. Okay, so that is as high we can go in that first digit. Now, what do we get when we go 16? Well, we get the number going on the other side. 17, 18. Now let's put in, let's go over here to 20. I'm sorry, I need to do that here. Let's say 25. Okay. What if we go up to 50? 3,200? What happens if we go up to 75? Okay. Whenever that stuff happens, I always do a save. Just in case it crashes on me, I've got a restore point to go back to. Okay. Now, what's 100? We can go all the way up to 255 here. And when we get up close to 255 and we do something like 250, not 255, and we do the same thing for G, which is green, and we do 250 for blue, that's almost white. Now, if we put 255 for all three values, it really would be white. Now, what I like to do is for the background color of a control like a gallery, I want it to be light gray, but not too gray. So I might do something like 225, 225, 25, 225. That's a nice gray color. And it's completely opaque or has an alpha value of 100 or 100%. Now, you want to change this by not giving it a number. You can just like play around with this thing here. Because if we had a button behind this, I drag that gallery up, you see it almost looks like this button has two different colors going on. Now you see a little bit of a lighter blue here on the right side. That's because that background is still showing through. In fact, let's do something like this. All right, I'll zoom back out. So I don't like to do anything like that to a gallery. But you know what, guys? Almost everything I'm showing you here applies to all controls. Okay. So to me, that's sort of what basics include. A concept, piece of knowledge, experience that applies to everything. Those are your basics. It doesn't mean whatever's easiest. Okay. That's my definition. All right. So I got something like this, and let's go in here and let's apply what we've learned. I'm going to go with 240, 240, 240, 240, and that's the color I'm going to use. Now I don't want it to clash with that green color. I'm going to move this thing around. And what I'm going to do for this gallery, we know if we go up here to the top, we have an items property. If you click on anything on this screen, you're going to have this drop down. It's always going to be there. And it's going to show you almost every property that you have to work with, specifically input type of properties. So let's bring over something that you'll be using a lot. And I'm going to type in here text box. Well, tried. Text box. So they call it text input. I'm going to use the classic one here for a moment because it actually uses an example of this. I can set this text input. Look at this, the first property I have over here in the property view. So all these different panes and all this stuff, they all work together. Okay, you can insert things here, you can insert things here. And if you click on a different UI element, a control that the user can interact with, you're going to see that you might have a lot of overlapping properties between all these controls. But over here on the properties pane, if you click on default, it's going to get selected here. Okay. Now, a lot of times I see my students when I'm helping them out, they share their screen and I say, okay, we're going to change the default. And immediately they go over here and say, okay, what are we changing this to? I'm like, I don't want you to enter anything there. I want you to click on the word default. Or if it's easier for you, just click on this. I mean, I a lot of times don't want to scroll. Now, what you could do is you could type something in here like fill or a color, and it should select that for you. I'm very grateful that Microsoft allows us to actually type in here. I mean, we can't make our own properties that way, but we're able to type something and get to it very quickly. And look at this. The color allows us to change the RGBA, and the last one is the alpha. So you see the function. We're providing all four of those values. Now, I didn't want to change the color. What I wanted to show you guys is the default. And I don't want to type in a literal value that I would be doing there. Notice what happens here. If I type in something there, it's going to put a double quote before and after, because you cannot do something like that as if it's a string or text. Whenever you hear the word string, think of a string. It may be a string or a bracelet or a necklace is made up of a string of values. Well, if you go back to the days of C and C++, the days of, that's funny because both of them are used widely even now. But there's not really a string type or a text type. What you would have are ASCII code characters that represent a letter. So you do have a char type, which is short for character. But if you want a whole word, you have to create an array of chars. Uh, I'm simplifying things in a way. So if you're a C or C++ developer, um, I'm just trying to talk about this in general terms. And what you would end up perhaps create is a pointer in memory to the first character in that string of characters. Okay. So whenever you hear string, that's why it's called string. At least that's how I've understood why it is called that. Um, so the data type in PowerApps is called text, not string. But if you create it something in like C sharp or some other languages, they might actually call it a string and not text. Okay. And the reason why I like to not put any literal values, what's a literal value? It means you give it a value and it's literally these 7 characters. And it can't be anything else because you put a double quote before and after. Now, you as the developer you could come in here and put some more characters into it. So in a way, it changes. But that's not going to change for the user unless you provide a way for them to change it. Okay. Now, what else could we put in here besides a literal value? Well, we could say now. Now, if you use a keyword like now, some of these keywords in Power Apps, they're functions. What is a function? That is going to be taught in detail in the PowerFX coding course. Okay. Which takes me to, or transition or segues into the the next thing. The 3 big things that you got to learn with Canvas Power Apps. What was the first one, guys? It was UI, controls, screens, components that have a visual element to it. Okay. So you've got UI, and a lot of things fall into that category. The second category was what? A few minutes ago, I told you it was data. Okay. Now, you see that I guess this little pointer here, this is my my cursor or my pointer, I guess, and you see the cursors blinking right there. And or you can just select the whole thing. A lot of times that's what I do. I double click on something and it selects the whole word. Now, what do we see here, guys? PowerApps is helping us out here. A lot of times people do not see this. Did you guys know that this coding window, this expression bar that you've always seen in Excel, you can open it up. Okay. So you might have tons of code in here. But at the very bottom, if you double click or you select or your cursor's like right before or after something, it's going to help you out. It's going to help you out by showing you the data type. Guess what that is? That is data. Now, it's not a database. I, I, I keep all of my dad jokes in a dad a base. All right, enough of my corny jokes here. I'm going to move things around a little bit, so hopefully I'm not covering anything up. So let's look at this even more. It's telling me the data type, and it's actually telling me the value in there. Now, is it still 414? It is. But do you see the seconds changing? Okay, so remember this, 4:14:31. I'm going to click on something else. I'm going to get rid of the coding window. You want the coding window there? There's a little chevron in the upper right corner. You just click on it. Show it, hide it. You'll need to know that. And you'll be using that quite a bit. Now, if you want your coding window to be a specific height, okay, there's now sometimes I call this a slider control. So when you use things, any type of GUI, I mean, I would say, oh yeah, there's a slider. It's not a slider. It's actually, you want to know what a slider is? Type in slider up here, and you're going to see that type of slider. What does that do? It slides around and the user can specify a number, in this case, 0 to 100. But we could click on the slider, we could give it more values. We can make this 1,000 if we wanted to. So just know that you're not limited by those numbers. Now there is a modern one. Of course, the modern controls always look nicer. And I'm trying to click on that slider, but I keep getting that image. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click. Notice what I'm doing here, guys. I need to move myself around yet again. I'm going to click on the slider. Notice what happens down here. We're on the home screen and I have the slider selected. How do you know if it's selected? You see these little dots that indicate that it's selected. Okay, and I can move it around. I can do all kinds of things. Now, while a control or a screen is selected, you're going to see a lot of the properties here being displayed between the Display tab and the Advanced tab. And sometimes it's just easier to get to things from these two tabs, and you'll start to become familiar with where exactly they're at. Sometimes people prefer this drop down. You can get at all the properties there, but those properties are input properties. So for example, a text input, something I call a text box. If you do some C# development, it doesn't really matter what language you use, but if you're creating a Windows application and you were to try to add a text input, it will be called a text box. Okay, so that's why I call it a text box. I'm not trying to be a rebel here. But I want you guys to know that because I say that out of habit for 26 years. So that's going to be a hard habit for me to break. There's default. Now, default is an input type of property. That means I'm telling it what value to start off with as default. Now, what can we do if we run our application? We hit the run button. If you hover over the run button, you get the keyboard shortcut, which is F5. Well, I'm just going to hit F5. Aren't you thankful that it didn't pass that F5 key press up to the browser? Because that is the special key that will refresh everything. And if you didn't save your PowerApps application, you could have lost some stuff there. Now I could hit F5 again. It's a toggle. Okay, so you either hit F5. Now that is used in a lot of other computer programming environments like Visual Studio or VS Code. Can you imagine what the VS stands for? So Visual Studio has been around for probably 24, 25 years. Before that, they had things like Visual Basic, Visual C++, Visual InterDev, and they worked pretty much the same. And then they unified it when .NET came out in 2001. No, I might, when I give dates on that, I'm probably talking about the beta because I was teaching .NET while it was in beta, so it was probably 2002 when it was finally released. So yeah, within those environments, you get a little play button. Within SQL Server Management Studio, you got a T-SQL code or a query that you want to run, you just hit F5. So it's a very universal thing. Okay. Now I'm going to run this again. Look at what we can do. We could wipe it out. Okay, it's wiped out. So this text box, I'm going to drag this down here. I could add over a label. And right now, a classic label, I sort of prefer that over a modern label at this point for a few various reasons that I won't go into now. Let's get a background color there. Now let's say as we type in this text box, you see it says text input 1. You really should give this a meaningful name. And you should prefix it that indicates what type of control it is. So txt. Notice there's no I for input. It's txt for text. Okay. And let's put in here current date time. And look at that. I changed the name. Oh, it went back to that. So I'm going to click on what it is that I named there. And when you click on it, you might think I'm about to rename it, but you'd be wrong. I'm going to hit Control C. And then over here on this label, I'm going to scroll up for this text. And I'm not going to leave that with a literal value. I'm going to paste that. And then we got some red squigglies. So let's hover over the red squigglies and see what we got. Expected a text value. Yeah, there's a text value in that text box. What gives? That is not text. That is the text input control. A text input control has properties. Now, do you see that we can access the text property? That is the text that's currently being displayed within the text input, not the default value. The user changed that or could change that. So we want whatever the user changed it to, or the default value that we started off with initially. Something else that I'll point out to you guys, this is basic stuff. If you zoom in, if you zoom out, you lose some things. Like notice there's only 2 dots there on the right side of the label. If we zoom in, oh, now we have 3. Because if you're trying to make this thing wider, you're going to do something like this, right? I'm like, oh, that's too not tall enough. And oh, it went too much. And you're trying to adjust it. And, sometimes things can get off. For example, this text box, it could be 50 height. And this guy isn't quite the same. But let's say at one point they were the same. And let me make this smaller here. You notice that I can use this or even this corner piece. Usually whenever I make a control, I want it to be the same thing as what's beside it. And I try to use this little dot here. A lot of times I'll change the height inadvertently or unknowingly. So what I like to do is I like to zoom in, and you see we got like little purple dotted lines showing that it lines up for sure with other things. Now that vertical one showing that we align with the gallery, and the horizontal ones are showing, hopefully, that we're lining up with the top and bottom of the other control. Let's say that this thing just needed to be shorter than that. Well, what you can do is you can move this around when you zoom in, and it will show you that you're perfectly centered with that other control. And unfortunately, I did not move my face. So hopefully you guys can see all that now. You see all those little dots. If you just needed it to be aligned at the top, maybe you can't get it right. Well, what you do is you hold down Shift or Control, and you select a second control. And then you can right click on this and you can align the tops. There you go. What else can we do? We can align the centers. What else can we do? Well, something that we could do is we could drag on this whole thing. Now we got that image back there, so it's going to give us a little bit of a problem. So if we hold on Control or Shift, select the 4 of these, now what can we do? We can group them together, which I don't recommend. If you want to group things together, I would recommend putting them in the same container. Okay, and there is a little trick to doing this, which is to make them a group. I was like, oh, what did that do? Believe me, if you want to click on that text box now, guess what's going to happen? It's going to select the group and not the text. I find that very annoying, and it slows you down. So now I'm going to right click on this, and I'm going to say add to container. So it's going to create a container and put them all in there. Isn't that nice? Now, what does that help us do? Well, that allows us, and this is a little tricky sometimes, but you get those 4 arrows that right on the edge. You see how tricky it is, even for me here? Let's give it a white background color. And I'm going to try to find, and you want the very lowest place until you get that. And it's still not allowing me. So what I do is I click on the container there. And it's still going to give me problems. You can make this really tall and then bring up the bottom. I can bring this down. The really great thing about containers is they help you make things responsive. You could put rounded corners on them. You can give them drop shadows. There we go. I finally got it in the right place. Do you guys see that? Now, I had the container selected. You see the container down here at the very bottom? I can go give it a drop shadow, extra bold. Oh, that looks sort of cool. It's got a nice shadow there. So you guys are seeing me use a lot of controls, and a lot of these controls have a lot of the same properties, but they're used for different purposes many times. Something that I like to do, if you're going to use this header control, it's a modern one. is you go to the insert pull down menu and you type in container. If you want some responsive design in your application, you're going to want to go with the horizontal or vertical. I'm getting to the point where I always want to use one of these because as long as you pick one of them, it works just like the vanilla container. But look at this, the direction over here. You can change it between horizontal and vertical. And if you're just going to put something in there, just one thing, like a header control, and I click in there and I paste it, it really doesn't matter if I make it horizontal or vertical, but it gives you flexibility, okay? And I'm going to make this thing yay big. Do people still say that yay big? I don't think so. So on this container here, I can go over to the border radius. Give it a nice big number like 20. Do you notice what happened? So the header's in there. Okay. I'm going to hold on control and select that rectangle underneath. And I'm going to bring these two guys down at least a little bit. Okay. Now this container over here, it just has the header. Well, you know what we could do is we can make that container not so wide. And if you ever want to make a big change to a screen, but you always want the old screen that you can go back to, all you got to do is simply right click on a screen and say duplicate. All right. So we duplicated the screen. What I want to do is delete that image in the background. I don't like that at all, or what it's become. I don't need this green thing here. If you ever tempted to use well, this is a component here, but at some point I actually used a rectangle. Sometimes you don't really want a rectangle, you want a container. Now this container can be moved around. Now, does that look nice? Does it look nicer than what we had before? I think so. I think you guys would agree with me. Let's make this gallery much smaller and just move it around. Okay, so what are the upsides of using containers that you see here? Well, we can have little drop shadows. Those look really nice. Now, you may not want to go with extra bold. Just go with regular. It's a little subtle. And I don't want white to be in the background color of the container on top of white. A lot of times I'll go in here and I'll get like a really light gray. Now, you guys know how to pick a light gray. Go over to custom and maybe type 250 all the way through. There's another way of doing this. You could click on it. Click on the color here. And you got the RGBA. You could change it there. Well, Microsoft has made this really simple and easy for us. Okay, we could simply type color dot white, but remember we wanted a gray. You should try out white smoke. Okay, that looks sort of cool. Okay. And I can move these things around a little bit. Look at that. And if you wanted to have more of a border there, you know what you could do? You could give it a border or two. I think black would be a little too much. So it looks like we're going with a blue theme. So let's pick a dark shade, hopefully, of the one that we're using all over the place. Now let's also bring that border radius up to maybe 12. Now I think the rounded corners on this container are a bit too much. We set it to 20. Let's make that 12. I think 12 is probably my favorite border radius. numeric value. All right. Now, what could we do with this container? We could copy and paste it. Now, if you do a copy and paste like that, it's going to put that container inside the container you were trying to copy it from. And I'm just going to remove all these things. And I'm going to take this toolbar, I'm going to cut it, and I'm going to put it inside this thing. Okay. And let's see what we have here. I'll make it just as wide as the previous one, maybe even shape it up a little bit. Doesn't that look nice? Now, I would probably say for this case, I don't want a 2 there. Let's go into the color. Okay, that's white smoke. What if we ever change that fill color? And then it doesn't look right with this color. You know, a good way of ensuring that it will always look right? Notice that border has 3 different parts. So I can't just click on this. You see how it says fill? What you need to do is go to border. You got border color, border style, border thickness. Okay, well, I'm going to go to border color. So there's the RGB value. What else can we do with color here? Let's say I want it to be a darker shade of whatever color that I picked for the fill. Now notice over here on the right side, it says color. Now if you click on color, it says fill over here. I don't like that is inconsistent. I wish that they would make those, it would either make it fill or you make it color. Typically color means foreground color, like the font color a lot of times with cascading style sheets, if you're familiar with that. But whenever a control does not have, if it has a foreground color, let's say we're displaying text there, that will be called color, and then there would be another place for fill. Just letting you know that. So I'm going to go back to border color. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to base this off of the fill of this container. Now, how are we going to do that? Well, we're going to start off by taking that out. Okay. Now, how can I reference the current control that I'm currently in? You notice down here at the bottom it says container 1, 2. You notice that container 1, 2 is selected. And you want to get at other properties on this control, like fill. Now, what are you going to have to do? Are you going to have to go over here and get the name of this, click in there like as if you're going to rename it, and Control C? No. All that just simply is not needed. What you need to do is utilize a keyword within Canvas PowerApps. And we're going to name this self. And that's what gets us to all the current properties for the control that we're inside of, that we're writing code for. So I'm going to say dot. Oh, look at that, fill. Now, if I leave it like that, do you see any difference? No. It needs to be either darker or lighter. Okay, well, let's do that. I mean, how much more lighter can we get than where we're at? Well, let's pick a little bit of a darker color. Maybe not white smoke. Maybe we go with, let me type white. We have white smoke, ghost white, floral white, now Navajo white, and antique white. Let's look at ghost white. Ooh, it's got a little bit of a blue tint. I love that. Why do I love it? Oh, there's that rectangle. Get rid of that. Why do I love it? It seems to have a blue tint in that. So if I click on that and go over to this, do you notice that the blue color is at its max and these other two are a little off? I mean, they're both 248, so at least those two things. So I like the fact that it has a little bit of a blue tint in there. Okay. Now, if we were to go over to the border color, and we're just looking at self.fill that has that nice blue tint, if we want that to be faded, maybe it's a really dark color. So we say color. So you have 140 names of colors by doing color dot whatever. Okay, just know that that's there. Those are the defined web colors. I believe by the W3 consortium. I think I'm saying that right. So all browsers will support all of those colors. Now in this case, I want to say fade. I want to fade the color. Okay, let's fade that really light blue color. How much are we going to fade it by? 50%. Now realize a percentage can also be expressed as a decimal. But I like to say 50%. It just seems more human readable that way. Now I'm going to save this and run it. Notice I hit that save button before I hit run. I've made it a habit. Now I'm going to zoom in. Can you guys tell that it has a border? Yeah, if you zoom up on it. Now what happens if we click on this thing and we make the border thickness, not to be 2, but to be 10? Now, can you see it? It's much easier to see, isn't it? Now, if we zoom in, I mean, they're not too far off. So if we do a color fade, maybe by 100%. Now, if you select the whole thing, it's going to show you the color right there. But if you made it 100%, I mean, that's going to go to pure white. Okay. But really what we want to do here, let's bring this down to maybe 5 for now. Okay. That itself, that doesn't look bad. But when I do a shadow like that, I like to give it a darker color. Now, how do you think we're going to do that? Are we going to use the color darken function? There is no color darken. There is no function that does that specifically. You know how it's done? You fade it. You fade it a lot and then it becomes dark. Color fade. Guess what you can do here? You can give it a negative number. Negative 100%. Okay, it's gonna color darken or fade it so much it ends up being black. So let's say 50% and see what that looks like. Okay, that's a little too dark. Well, let's do it by 10. And even that seems a little bit much, doesn't it? Let's go with 5%. And that negative makes it darken. Okay. Now, if we made that to be 2, that looks better. Now, let's go over to that container that's got the header in it. Could we put similar things there? Yeah. So let's change that light to regular because this container down here is a regular, right? It is. So I think we might want to go with a 1. You see what PowerApps is like? All this UI, you drop the controls on the screens, you play around with the properties, and boom, you've got a UI. If nothing else, if you never want to become a software developer or PowerApps creator, you might like it for the prototyping and wireframing for something done in a completely different type of app. Maybe you've got a bunch of C# developers and you are a business analyst, or you are the the UI UX person that creates all the interfaces. They're going to be doing it as a web app or something. But look how easy it is to create a prototype or a wireframe for them. All right. Now, something I think does look a little odd here. You notice the height is 75. What is the height of this container? It's 53. Okay, well, what happens if we were to make this 53? What happens there? Ooh, that doesn't look good. What you can do is you can link controls together. Or, in other words, I've got the header control selected here, and you see it down here at the bottom as well. And what I'm going to do here is I can link properties one to another. And you actually saw that here for this label. This is called control linking. And it is something that you'll be using so much, you won't even remember when you didn't know how to do control linking like this. So whatever you want to display, or really any of the properties, you can have it tied or bound to a different control and a different property there. And there we have it. Now I'm going to go up to this header, but I want this to be the same thing as the container that we're in. Now, how would we do that? How we would do that is we could say container 2. Now let's go over to the height of this header, and right here it says 75. Now you notice I didn't type in a different number here. I clicked on the word height, and then it took the focus up here. I could say container 2, but guess what the container 2 is? It's this header controls parent. It contains it. So, do we have a keyword that we can use here? Absolutely. Parent. And it already knows what we're trying to do. Parent height. So I just hit the tab key on my keyboard. Oh, look at this. These things are they're starting to look like they belong together. Now, what I would do, I might make this thing that I'd like to pull up here. There we go. Let's make this height be something like 80 or 70. That doesn't look bad. Okay. Now what you notice is the header control automatically changed when we changed the property of the other. All right. So now this container here, I want it to be the same exact height as this guy. So if I click on this guy, it's 70. But why would we go over here and type 70? If we ever change this container, the header automatically changes. I would want this thing to automatically change just to make the two things be consistent. Now, how do I do that? I go over to height and I click on the word height, and then I type in container 2 dot height. Okay. Okay, now our toolbar isn't quite right. And if you got to move stuff around quite a bit, I definitely recommend that you zoom in. Now I'm holding down shift to go horizontally or to mess with the horizontal scroll bar. You can just sort of eyeball it. That's called the TLAR method. That looks about right. Now, if I make this a bit smaller and I'm going to zoom in as much as I can now. Do you see the spacing on the top and the bottom here? They seem about right. All right, so now I'm going to move it maybe a little closer to here. And this, I want the appearance of the padding being the same all the way around. And the TLAR method works out really well for us there. And guess what's going to happen now? You're going to show this app off and your boss is going to say, those two things are a little too much. So what you could do is change that to 60. Look what happened. So this thing changed, but now this thing is out of sync, isn't it? What can we do to fix that? Well, I'm glad you asked. So I want you to consider something. If I add over, let's say, a rectangle, and I put it right here, you've got 4 properties that changes the size and the position of that control. Okay, so look over here on the right side, the property pane. You have an X, which is 90. You have a Y, which is a lot more. Okay, so we got a X and a Y. So the X, if I move it all the way over here, what is that? It's 0 now. That X, do you guys remember algebra? X, the X-axis is horizontal. Okay, right and left. You change the X value, you're either going right or left. And right in the middle is the center. Now here in PowerApps, 0 for X is going to be right there. Not only that, but remember Y, which is the vertical plane. If you want something right up there, look at the X and the Y. It's 0. So if you remember algebra, geometry, we're working, so you know how you got these, you got the Y and you got the X. And if you had 0, 0 for each, it was right in the middle. But in this case, what we're working with, you had 4 quadrants. Remember that? You're only working with one quadrant here. It is the lower right corner or quadrant within that space. Okay, so I want you to understand X and Y. Now, if I move it all the way over here, even make it smaller, what's the X and the Y? Okay. Now, if you want to know, I'm going to hit save. I'm going to go into settings. And I am going to go down to display. Oh, look at this. Perhaps this is the first time that you've seen these settings. You can make it portrait now if you want. I wouldn't recommend it. If you want it to be fully responsive, you got to turn off these things here. Okay. Now, as it currently sits, that's just a ratio. If I said custom, there we go. Those are the numbers for the application. So if we give that rectangle these two numbers, 1366, 768. I'm going to try to remember this. 1366 by 768. 1366 by 768. The user will not be able to see that anymore. Now, hopefully I can still drag it back over here, or maybe I'll just do something like that. Now, it's very, width and height is very simple. If you wanted it, of course, it's a rectangle, right? But if I made this 100 by 100, it's going to be a perfect square. Okay, that all makes sense, right? So what happens if I had, let's say, a classic label? I like classic labels better than the modern ones. And I changed the back color to be a lot like everything else. Now, if you're going to go with a dark color, you want the text to appear. You want to go with a color that has a lot of contrast so people can actually read it. Okay. And I can cut it. I can paste it inside this container and put it over here. I can make this thing display all kinds of stuff like self dot x. Wow, look at that. And if we were to move it, it changes. What about the y? There we go. Has a y of 20. Now it's 39. So you guys understand all that, because I'm about to take it to the next level. But you need to understand that. This thing needs to be vertically centered. Now we could use the TLAR method again, and we could achieve that. But somebody comes in here, and maybe that's going to be you. You change the height, and then it's not centered anymore. So let's center this, shall we? There's actually a mathematical formula that I'd like to share with you, and you definitely want to write this down if it doesn't immediately make sense, okay? So the toolbar, I see the Y. So the Y goes up and down, and I thought the X looked fairly good, and the X won't change if you make the container wider or shorter. So Y is the most important thing here. What I'm going to tell you is you want to use parentheses. Do you guys remember in algebra class, there was an order of precedence? So you're doing arithmetic, you would know that the multiplication and division will always occur first, or happen first, or be evaluated first before addition and subtraction. And if you wanted the addition and subtraction to happen first before a multiplication or division, you got to use parentheses and say, hey, this is a unit here. This needs to happen together. Okay, so that's why we're going to use parentheses. And you want to take whatever the parent is. We want to work with the y? No, we're wanting to center the height of this thing against the height of the parent. Okay, well, the height of the parent is that. Well, let's subtract. We'll subtract self dot height. Well, that doesn't really look centered to me. That's because we need to divide this by 2. Okay, it's nice and centered. Now, keep this as a little code snippet, because let's say we got some other things here. Let's go into this guy's y and just paste that formula. Look at that. That label's perfectly centered in there. So now I want to try something out. This container, look at that. Ugh, that doesn't look good. Something's still wrong. Well, it's always centered, isn't it? All right. And let's say maybe we give the user a slider like this. And they might have a personal preference on how small or large this all is. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to look for, oh, layout. I can say vertical. Okay, that seems a little bit more apropos or appropriate for something like this. And what should be the minimum and maximum? Right now we've got 1,000. That might be a little weird. What if we had 10,000 in here? Well, the slider's name is slider 1. I'm going to copy that. I'm going to go up to the header container. And I'm going to make this thing, the height of it, be dynamically tied to something the user can change. So I'm going to say slider1.value. Now with a slider, you can give it what the default is, and maybe you want that to be 70. I'm going to save it and I'm going to run. Whoa. Whoa, Nelly. I can tell you right now, I want this slider on top. There it is. So 1,000 really isn't a good color. Also, if I move it all the way up, I want it to be almost collapsed. And then when I move it down, then I want it to be large, not the other way around. Okay. Well, we don't want 10,000. What should we base it on? What's the height of our screen? 1366? Well, what if somebody else comes in here and they say custom and they change that to be maybe they make the width to be 1,000 and make the height 1,000 as a perfect square. That would look weird, right? I'm going to go back to this. So now you really don't know. The scale to fit, PowerApps will actually make and change the dimensions based on that ratio. Those are called ratios. And it would do so automatically. So how do we get at the value? All right, let's go over to max and let's look at parent. What's the parent? Parent's the screen. What is its height? Okay, that will be the maximum. Now what's the minimum? 0 sounds great because if I set it to 0, I just want them to disappear. Let's try this out, shall we? I'm going to hit save, and I hope you're doing as well as you're following along. And if I go to 0, hey, it disappears, but guess what? It still has a little bit of shadow that's showing. Okay. And I'll make it bigger. Okay. It doesn't, anything past this amount, 80, especially 88, 85, that's not good. Okay. So how are we going to handle this? You know what we could do, because we now know how to link things up. I'm going to go to this container. This guy needs to really change. And it needs to change what property? The height? No, the height is already set to be the exact same height as that guy. Okay. So how are we going to do this? Oh yeah, it's the Y property. Because if I change this Y to be like 500, okay, now it's not in the way at all. But I want it to be close to this guy. I'm going to get this container name container2. And by the way, I want to show you the best practices as we go along here. You should never have a control called container2. This should be called either container or CNT. A lot of people do not like that prefix. Not sure why. So let's just use CTR. It could mean container, it could mean control in general. And we're going to call this header bar. All right, so I'm going to use that name. And then down here on the Y, let's reference that and we'll say it's Y. Does that give us what we need? No, really doesn't. Because now it's just underneath it. Okay, what if we say the height of it? Is that right on? Look at this. There's an overlap. Why is that overlap there? Because it's only the height of that. Is there any space on top? Does this container have a Y value? Oh, it's 12. Okay, so let's go down here and we're going to say for the Y, you know what? Let's add 12 to that and see if that looks right. Well, it doesn't overlap, but it's right up against it. What shall we do? We want to, you know what we want? You got to ask yourself, self, what do I want? Well, let's take a look at this. First of all, the spacing at the top looks different than the spacing on the side, which I don't like. I always like those to be the same. Let's make that X be 15, the same as the X. Now, what if we ever change the X? Well, you want the Y to be updated, right? So let's just not play around here, guys. Let's say self.x. Now, if we ever change X, the Y is going to be updated, and that's exactly what we want. Now it's all perfectly spaced there. Okay, but this container should not be called this. This should be called CTR Toolbar container. Okay, there we go. And there's a little bit of an overlap, it seems. How are we going to handle this? So I'm going to click on that and look at the Y. What's the Y say? Oh, 12. Do you know what? It's no longer 12. How are we going to do this? Okay. A lot of times this type of stuff just comes down to math and just thinking it through. You don't have to know algebra, even probably pre-algebra and things that you've learned before. Fractions, division, multiplication is most of what you need, okay? Or just, might I say, logic. Just think through it logically. All right, how are we going to get at that 12 or the 15 or whatever? Well, we got the height. Did you know that you can reference the same control over and over again? In this case, I want to reference its Y. Now, does that give us exactly what we need? No, there needs to be spacing between these two guys. But how much spacing? That's a good question. Well, you know what I could do is I could say plus the Y again. You could do that, but a mathematics professor might laugh at you. So we'll say multiply that by 2. And now it's perfectly spaced. Okay. Now we're making some good progress. Let me move this down really low. Oh, look at what's going on here. It just sort of adjusts. That's pretty neat. I like that. Now let's get rid of some of the other clutter that's on the screen. And keep in mind, guys, if you ever make a big change, like you're ripping out controls, you're going to be adding or especially removing a lot of code. What you want to do is you want to make sure you save. You got a manual restore point. You should duplicate the screen, really. Sometimes it's pretty quick. Sometimes if you got a lot of stuff going on, it takes a lot of time. Okay, what are we going to do here? I want to take out all that junk. And we don't really need that thing there anymore. Okay, starting to look like a real application, isn't it? All right, I want to save. I'm going to run. Wow. Now, if we move it all the way up, that's too much. I never want the user to make these two containers any more than something like this, where the spacing looks, well, it's not quite right. But you know what would be completely right if we implemented math in that? So let's limit the user to only being able to go up to, we're going to set the max here, the parent.height. No, that's way too much. What if we divided that by 2? How would that affect us? Sometimes you just got to try different things out. Pretty close, but I still want some padding there. Okay, let's see if we can accomplish that. All right. Now the max is right here. We divided it by 2. Let's subtract CTR header bar. It's Y. Now, how much padding do we really have, guys? The padding, let's say right now it's just 15. I think that's right, but if I move this all the way up, we do have padding here. We have padding here. We do not have padding at the very bottom. So what should be the max? You know what? Let's multiply that by 2 and we'll try it out. So I'll bring this up. That looks about right, but that looks a little weird. How are we going to handle this? I would suggest for the max, we could just forget. Let me think here. No, we need the parent height, which is the screen. Did you know that there are other things that you can reference, either objects, keywords? We could look at the app dot height, okay? And that should actually give us the same thing as the parent. Now, these two containers could be inside another container. So what does that tell you? You may not want to rely on parent for something like this. We really are talking about the height of the whole screen. So we divide that by 2. Okay, we divide it by 2. So that gives us a point right here. And then we take the header bar, it's Y, multiply it by 2. Okay. And it seems like there's double the space down there. Why would that be? We got to realize the maximum, we start off with a point in between that. Okay, so maybe instead of saying 2, because the point at the very middle is right there in the middle of these two guys. So maybe instead of multiplying by 2, we need to multiply by 1.5. And sometimes you just don't know if everything's right until you test it. That looks good. Now, it might look like there's less space down here than up there because there's a shadow down there. So if we go to this header bar and give it the same exact drop shadow. What do we have as drop shadow down here? It is regular. So if we want it to be more prominent, now do we see a drop shadow? Yeah, we see a drop shadow under there. So you can change the drop shadows, and adjust those. So there we go. So the user now has the ability to make it either completely disappeared minus the drop shadow. Now we could turn the drop shadow off if the height is 0. Guys, you can do anything with PowerApps, I tell you. Never think that PowerApps isn't up for the job. So what I want to do is I want to set the drop shadow here to maybe semi-bold. And guess what I can do now? For this guy, I can go into drop shadow. And I could say that the other guy, it's drop shadow. I want it to be the same. Okay, very good. Well, let's go up to the top. So if we get rid of the drop shadow, this guy's drop shadow will be gone too. And that's what we're sort of looking for, if you ask me. So let's go look at the drop shadow here. Now, we want to do some type of like a conditional statement. So with coding, and this is low code, there's not a lot of code. Now, in the PowerFX coding course, we're going to really dig into a lot of code. But this is the foundation of coding. You got data types. And beyond data types, you can have a conditional statement that says, hey, if this is true, then I want you to do this. But if it's not true, I want you to do something else. And that brings me to the third part of everything you need to know about PowerApps. You've got UI, then you got data types. Hey, is that a string? Is that a number? Is it a collection? Is it a database table? Is it a JSON data format? Okay, so in Canvas PowerApps, you need to know the UI. You need to know about data types. And lastly, you need to know how to code. And this is the first part of coding. Okay? So a beginner level series of videos, it needs to implement all 3 of these really. And then as we get further along and past the basics, then we need to focus on these 3 areas individually, like in a deep dive. And then lastly, you want, as you're creating your first app or your third app, you need to incorporate all 3 of these things that you have learned, bring them together, and that's where you get app magic. Trivia question. Do you know what PowerApps was called before it was called PowerApps? Do, 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 do. That's my Jeopardy music. My sad attempt. It was called At Magic. All right. So we're going to say if. Hey, if. If what? If myself, if I have no height, how do we know if there's no height? Well, we say, hey, if our self.height is 0, that means I shouldn't be displaying it at all. I want to do a drop shadow dot. These are all your choices. None. Comma. We want to do a semibold. Now, is this really going to work? I'm going to save. I'm going to run. Okay. That looks good. Notice the shadow that we see up here on this guy really isn't there. We're seeing the shadow of the guy above. So, because we link all these properties and controls together, as one thing changes, that slider, the whole world changes. The whole screen changes, okay? So if we were to go up to this header bar, we just change one thing. Let's change that 15 into a 30. Oh, okay. That seemed to have created a problem. Should we have done that? Yes, we should have. That just means that we have more opportunities to learn here. First thing I want to address on this header bar is it shouldn't be so wide. Okay, so I'm going to click on that width. And in this case, I am going to use parent, the parent's width. Well, look what happened. Now it's hanging over the side. What does that look like if you run it? Not good. Okay, so how are we going to handle this? You got to use your noggin. Is that what that's called? You got to think about it logically. So there's the whole width. And I know I'm offset. How much of my offset horizontally? That's the X. And it is 30. Okay. So we should probably subtract 30. Now, should we go up here and say minus 30? No, we shouldn't. We should say self.x. Okay. That still doesn't look right, guys. What if we multiplied the x by 2? Is that what we need? Yes, that is what we need. But this bar's all messed up. What is going on here? So let's make sure we got that control name there. And I'm going to go down to this guy. Oh, look at this. I want the X to be the same thing as the other container's X. And then look at this. Oh, that's messed up now. So let's go over to the height. Now, should we do exactly the same thing that we did in the other one? No. We should just say whatever its width is what I'm going to go with. Okay. Now, I really do think that this container would look best if we darken it quite a bit, maybe by 20%. I think what I'd like to do is go with the blue color I'm just seeing all over the place. For example, that button right there, it has a nice blue. The heading has a nice blue. Well, let's go over and look and see what that header control has for its color. It's blank. Well, it just so happens to be PowerApps does have a theming system, okay? And you can tie into it. Let me show you how you can tie into it. So I want to change this border color. And I don't have to fade and get something that looks like gray. What I'm going to do is say app. Remember we said app.width or app.height? Okay, what else do we have here? Dot. Whoa, look at all this stuff. At the very bottom, we have theme. Okay, we have a theme to work with. Now I'm getting red squigglies. Oh, look, it's a record type. I'm going to hit dot. Oh, look at that. Colors. What about prime? Okay, there we go. So these are all the colors. We have a primary color, and then we have a contrasting foreground color that we can use. Now, based on that primary color, we have 8 shades that are lighter and 7 shades that are darker. Now I'm going to stop talking about shades because somebody might mention that movie. All right, so I'm going to say colors.primary. Sometimes I'm hilarious, sometimes I'm not. Does that look nice? Do you guys like that? I'm going to save. I'm going to run. Now, is this what we want? That's pretty snazzy. I like it. Now, I took it all the way down to 0. I don't see any drop shadows, but I got this blue color. What's up with that? Okay. It's that border color. So, you know what you could do? You now know how to use if statements. If self dot drop shadow, if that is drop shadow dot none, I'm going to use a special color here called color dot transparent. Otherwise, the primary color. What's transparent, as you can imagine? Transparent. Now, there's something a little more going on there. I'm not going to spend time looking at that. But, guys, we have completed a good chunk of the basics. Now, how many Fridays do we have for workshops leading up to the PowerFX course? We have 2 more. We have March 28th and we have April 4th. And the Coding FX course, you'll need to have all your basics down, and that will be April 7th. You should see links down to sign up for that. Right now is the cheapest time to sign up for that. So take advantage of that. Get it cheap. And by the time we reach that point, you guys will have mastered all the basics of Canvas PowerApps. Thanks a lot, guys. Now, you might be wondering what video you should watch next. So, over here, I'll put a video that you might want to see. Or better yet, the one that YouTube thinks you'll want to see next. And then over here, I'll have another video or maybe even a playlist. Enjoy.